I just got off finishing watching the animated movie Goat. Like, yeah, that's literally the name, just a single name of a land creature. And prior to my watch of this movie, I was not having the most highest impression in the world of it, simply because I haven't divulged much of my time seeking its promotional material and trailers. Like, yeah, so aside from all this nonsensical dialogue, did the GOAT movie actually live up to itself being goated? Well, if you were to say the movie is very goated, I would say you are right. Slightly. It is a decently written film, I shall say. Unfortunately, I don't personally see it as like the elite level, but still, a film that has a lot going for it. So anyways, what's up guys? It's Willie and today we'll be talking about Sony Pictures' latest animated film, GOAT, which Sony's Picture has a pretty unique spot in the animation industry where they've released some very notable films, with last year in particular being the K-pop Demon Hunters, which don't be disappointed, but I still have yet to watch that movie and I will eventually at some point down the road. But anyways, that movie I heard was a really big hit for production, so it felt like Sony's was on track to continue pursuing such strong originality with their future films, and this is one where we continue to basically see them experiment their creativity with their newest edition here. We're in brief on a general description of this movie. This is about a goat named Will, whose voice is lent by Caleb McLaughlin, and he did an excellent job starring as Will and giving the character the decency with his charm and humor. And while I did not know him prior to this movie, I do prop him up for this efficiency to deliver Will's charisma. So Will right here is a goat who was a longtime sports fan of Rollerball, which is basically Vinland's culture of basketball. And from his childhood, he had one particular player who he idolized known as Jet Fillmore. And I'll share my piece more about her when I talk more in-depthly on the movie and near the end of the video. But generally, she's a star player of Rollerball whom Will adores and always dreamt of being on her level of playing Rollerball. But the fundamental issue is that he has a significant size difference compared to most animals who play, where he is a goat and he's very small, and he constantly gets ridiculed and challenged for his wishes to become a player. And this sets in stone the revolution of when he actually is invited to be part of the Dorn Vineland team, to which among those players is his idol Jet, where from there on out he will build his revolution to prove how despite his small size he can be able to play ball just like every other player, including his idol. So that briefly summarizes the plot for the movie, and it does sound fascinating as it really vocalizes the whole culture of the underdog story, with Will kind of embodying that underestimated figure who proves everyone's judgment of him wrong. And in many ways, this kind of feels like it takes a lot of cues from Zootopia. Obviously, the first film, which as real I can say that the film is about to be 10 years old as we move along this year, which is crazy. But yeah, similar storyline with the main character being underestimated but proving themselves their values. And while this film does become lenient on that trope, they do enhance a bit of the themes to branch out to like teamwork and perseverance as apt for the plot surrounding sports. Now to me, I'm not the kind of guy who watches much sports, but this film does its grace to flaunt on the underdog storyline, which while I know it can be a bit of a predictable ride because it is mostly foreseeable how it's going to play out, but I do like how it's not entirely rigid and incorporates a more fluid gig that would create this very dynamic pacing for the film. So getting off all this general talk off my chest, we can get right into the spoiler review of this film's underdog story. So right off the bat, we begin with a very young Will joined with his beloved mother, who is also a sports fan too, where they'd be watching a game of Rollerball on the sidelines, and on the team they're rooting for among them is Jet Fillmore, a Black Panther who is the star of the game and became Will's inspiration and idol, where she does have a very compelling role in this movie. That is a really great facet to have. Will aspires to be just like her, and his mom has some faith that he can. And it didn't seem like she was just doing it to flatter him. It actually felt very genuine that she was believing in that her son was gonna be able to fulfill his goal to become a Rollerball player, which does sadly become tragic when time flies by, where years later, Will has grown up and is not in the best state of life, with his struggle to make ends meet for his rent and having a side job of working at a restaurant, while really only having his spare time to spend on practicing basketball, which even then is not the greatest experience for him when he is quickly judged by some bigger animals who ridicule his attempts to play despite his smaller size. Meanwhile, we got Jet Fillmore, who is continuing maintaining her career as a Rollerball player, but unfortunately her team, the Vinland Thorns, are down a number and have been struggling. So then we're met with our antagonist for the movie, Maine, who, while we don't get a lot of depth with him, he surely is a very menacing antagonist for the movie with how overconfident and cunning cunning he is with his shtick, often putting down others who are below his profile level, and that's the case sir for Will when the logo challenges him after basically putting some mockery on Jet's name. And while they compete, Will does lose, however he does partially get some upper hand on Maine, breaking his ankles in the process, which hey, the GOAT has now become an ankle breaker. But this match between him and Maine ended up on social media that caught the attention of the owner of the Vineland Forums, Flo, who sees those potential in Will and eventually offers him a spot on the team, especially when they were down a number. And he's delighted to take the spot, especially with his dreams now really becoming fulfilling. However, Jet does not take this lightly, as already with her team declining, she already has doubts in Will's ability. And this does give us a really interesting dynamic between the two, with a longtime fan and their idol, and this would lead to a really developing team player relationship that bring both each other's arcs together. And to me, this is where the Zootopia mirroring peaks in this part, where it's kind of reminiscent to Zootopia and Bogo with his doubts with her values, which is exactly what Jet parallels here. But the difference is that we get more emphasis and depth on Jet and this dynamic she has with Will, where Bogo is kind of in and out, where that movie doesn't really expand too much between him and Judy, and it kind of just feels sudden when he eventually has a softened heart for her. Where in this movie, I like how they showed us the two really being able to bond with each other, getting to learn each other's backstories and whatnot. Hey, that scene when Jet went with Will to his restaurant and discovered a lot of props that signify her, showing how much people really idolized her. And also at the same time, I love how Will opened up about his life growing up with his mom being another fan of hers, where unfortunately Will's mom had tragedy struck at her. And it was a very heartwarming moment between these two. But then we get to times where Will is practicing in a court, and I haven't mentioned this yet, how this movie really incorporates a lot of the modernized internet culture, where like memes and technology is being a central tone to this film, where really that pinnacle is done literally using the infamous goat scream. But afterwards, we eventually get to the semifinals. Flo drops a huge bombshell to Jet that she has sold the Forns team, which is going to cause the team to disband and quell their chances to earn the Claw, which is the championship trophy. And Will eavesdrops on this and tries to convince Jet to alert every other team member, but she somehow refuses to, and this is a turning point for Jet's character, seeing that her reputation is on the line and not really trusting of her fellow players to contribute. She eventually would play this very selfish strategy of just hogging the ball to herself and constantly making the shots to herself, and while that does lead to the team's win, this irritated a lot of the members, especially Will, when this really crossed the line on him, especially since all this could have been handled a lot more neutrally, but she actively didn't put in the faith of her fellow teammates, and through that lost the respect of her, which caused them to forfeit from the team. And now Jet, realizing how she done messed up, she instantly goes to reconcile with Will, which the fact that she went to Will first reflects on how much she has warmed up to him since his enrollment on the team, and also opening up why she played the way she did was just under her personal worry of losing her reputation and fame through another loss. And especially with the bombshell news that everyone eventually learned about the team being sold, it was definitely another alarming aspect that had a lot of weight to this. So with that, they're able to get their team back together, which was pretty easy. And this is something that I can highlight as a bit of a downside with this movie, is the fact that it feels like we rushed a lot of the back third to essentially meet up with the climax of the plot. And here we get to it, which is the finals, and it is the Forns facing off against the Magma. And what do you know who's the lead player there? Maine, which I will say a little unimpressed that we don't get much of him, especially if he is really the final boss to be taken down. Like, I mean, yeah, we had these like very blunt exchanges he had with like Jet and continuous mockery of Will's name, but feels like that was just pretty much it. Kind of shallow in a way, which I'll say the Zootopia mirrorings is definitely there with the case like Bellwether, but just revoking the twist villain factor of them all, because at least we have a lot more understanding of Maine's motives. The game goes fine as it is until Jet injures her leg, which puts everything on the line without her being able to compete further. But Will demonstrates his values and contributes carrying the team for the remaining play until things become a train wreck due to Maine's grievous plays that ends up costing an ejection on one of the foreign players, and that leads to probably the peak of Jet's growth, where she willingly sacrifices her own personal health just to help the team, and Will especially, to triumph this finals. And while she does make her leg injury much worse, she gives the honors of letting Will make the final and winning shot as part of a jukey move to throw May off of his tracks, which proves to be literal, as he would end up having his hair burned off, which is a nice humiliating comeuppance for him after constant mockings of others. But anyways, you heard it, the Villain Forms won the Claw. And while I know it's a predictable result through given films like this, it is still the engaging ride through the journey to see how the characters we grew attached to were able to triumph this victory, especially through the more underdog lens. And before we had to end it off, remember the subplot involving the selling of the team? Well, it turns out one of the members within were able to gain ownership of it, meaning that the team can now stay together. You're a saint, man. But overall, it does really conclude this film with the lessons of teamwork and community, as we saw that pan out with the Villain Forms. So yeah, that's the movie for you. It has this great charm, obviously coming down to its grouping of characters. Like Will obviously takes the show and embodies embodies the plot well enough with his very relatable life and his journey living on his dream to be a rollerball player. And then we get to Jet Fillmore, the higher profile character that also made the lasting impact on this movie. And I really liked her growth arc throughout this film, kind of showing how despite her athletic background, she still has her own sort of errors, like her own ego, with her career being a major highlight of that. And it's what I like when we're giving depth to her to make her character a lot more dynamic than what would appear at face value. And I think seeing how she truly started warming up to Will as he proved his values to her was very empowering for me. And what hits more deep for her arc was when she couldn't have filter with her ego anymore, especially with her reputation on the line. So in that one game where she just was looking out for herself led to Will basically disowning her because she exposed the kind of standards she has, which is favoring over the meta of teamwork. But it's from there that she does become a very rootable figure to have her redeeming qualities, especially with how much we've grown to attach with her dynamic with Will and seeing her soften on him. And from there on in, when the moment that she makes it up to her team and essentially sacrifice all of her pleasures of her reputation just for her team's achievement through teamwork is such a satisfying growth arc for a high profile character who had this compelling development. And it's also pretty convenient for her as a Panther to have this central role, as coming out of 2025 in animation, we've had a lot of felines really take the central spotlight of their respective films. So it was pretty much passing on the torch to her. But yeah, I like her role in this film and her story does have a really strong impact. And then aside from those two, the rest of the characters were just fine on their own right, but I do like the humor that the team members brought. And hey, we had a pretty decent cast of big names starring in this movie. And then the animation quality is vastly well embellished. I mean, Sony really kills it with their distinct style of animation, with the strong form of their lighting and overall standout quality that makes a lot of the action sequences very striking to me. And that's kind of the proponent to Sony's picture, is that they're able to create their own sort of identity with animation that make their formula very distinct and has a fun blend on the frame rate. So with my final thoughts, I have to really give it to the makers here. They truly enhanced the creative quality that has brought us a very organic film that built up this charming story of determination in reaching your dream goals. And that's without taking account to them giving a great olive branch to give in depth on the idolized figure so that she also shares an arc of her own to compel the plot more deeply. Very rewarding film, and I'm always up for the originality quality in it, and Sony has just demonstrated a time again that they know what and when to get the job well executed. And while there is some flaws with some of the pacing, where some heartfelt scenes felt really rushed and didn't take that efficient time to have some extension to it, otherwise I still give props for the consistency with this film in spite of those things. And overall, I'm always all in for these Amphro movies. Just got out of reviewing one not too long ago. But with that, this film is a win-win for me. But that's my opinions and thoughts on this movie. I would personally say it's worthwhile checking this film out. Let me know what you guys think of it down in the comments below. And since you made it to the end here, you might as well tap like and subscribe and check out more of my content, where I'm going to be putting out more coverage on animations as we go along. And here, talking about what's coming up, obviously the Hoppers movie is just right around the corner, and I'll be making a coverage on that movie when I get to watch it. And then also, as of this recording, I'm still knee-deep on editing the Wonder Pets retrospective, which as I'm recording this, it's been very hectic. But I'll promise you, I'll get that out in time for its anniversary, so bear with me on that. But anyways, this is all I can spew out for this video. Appreciate the tune in, guys, and see y'all in the next video.